the Copa Room's brightest star. The lights in the Copa Room dimmed to a hush, the orchestra's final warm-up notes fading into the expectant chatter of 1,000 well-dressed patrons. A single spotlight cut through the smoky haze, illuminating the shimmering red curtain. A collective intake of breath swept through the room, then a roar erupted as the curtain parted to reveal him. Dean Martin, possibly suave in a tailored tuxedo, a perfectly knotted silk tie, and a mischievous glint in his eyes, stepped into the beam. He offered a casual, almost lazy wave, but the effect was anything but. The applause intensified, a wave of adulation that could nearly lift the very roof of the sands. He took a moment, letting the adoration wash over him, a small knowing smile playing on his lips. He wasn't arrogant. He simply understood the unspoken contract between himself and this crowd. Pure, unadulterated entertainment. With a flick of his wrist, he signalled the band. The opening brassy fanfare of Everybody Loves Somebody burst forth, a joyous explosion of sound that instantly set toes tapping and shoulders swaying. Dean's voice, a warm, resonant baritone, filled the vast room with an effortless charm. He didn't just sing, he crooned, he purred, and he invited everyone into his world of easygoing delight. He moved with a languid grace, working the smudge as if it were his own living room, making eye contact with audience members, sharing a private joke with a tilt of his head. He held a highball glass, occasionally taking a sip, lending an air of convivial nonchalance to the polished performance. The Copa Room was a kaleidoscope of vibrant energy. Laughter punctuated the lyrics, spontaneous applause erupted after a particularly smooth vocal run, and the clinking of ice against glass provided a rhythmic counterpoint to the music. Women in elegant gowns swayed in their seats, men in their sharp suits leaned forward, captivated by the sheer magnetism radiating from the stage. Dean was in his element, a natural showman who made it all look so wonderfully easy. He effortlessly transitioned from a playful ad-lib about his drink to hitting a perfect note, never missing a beat. The air crackled with a unique brand of joy, a feeling that for this moment in this room all worries were suspended, replaced by the sheer pleasure of being in the presence of a star. He finished the first chorus, and as the band swelled for the second, his eyes scanned the tables, a habit born of genuine attentiveness. It was then, amidst the sea of smiling faces, that he saw her. A woman at a front row table, her face pale, her hand pressed to her chest, a look of profound distress replacing her earlier wide smile. Her companion, a man in a dark suit, was trying to get her attention, a worried furrow in his brow. Dean's smile faltered, almost imperceptibly. The band was swinging into the next verse, the energy still high, but his focus had shifted. His quick wit, usually employed for a cleverer side, was now assessing a genuine human need. His voice, for a split second, wavered on a note, a subtle tremor that only the most dedicated fans might have caught. The music continued its joyous surge, but the casual ease had vanished from Dean's eyes, replaced by a flicker of concern that cut through the bright lights and the loud music. The rhythm of the show for him had suddenly skewed. He took another sip from his glass, but his gaze remained fixed on the woman, a silent question forming in his mind. The show, as always, must go on, but for Dean Martin, there were some things more important than the spotlight. A pause for compassion. The spotlight clung to Dean as he glided through Memories Are Made of This, his voice a warm embrace around the melody. The crowd, a sea of glittering gowns and sharp suits, swayed gently, lost in the crooner's effortless charm. He was at the top of his game, every note perfect, every wink landing with precision. Yet as his gaze swept across the faces in the front row, something snagged his attention. Nestled in a plush velvet seat, directly beneath the stage's glow, was Eleanor Vance. Her face, usually a picture of quiet composure, was etched with a profound sorrow. Her shoulders were hunched, a delicate handkerchief clutched tight in her hand, and the occasional tremor shook her frame. A tear, catching the stage lights, tracked a silver path down her cheek. It wasn't a casual sniffle, this was deep, consuming grief. Dean's smile faltered, barely perceptible to the roaring crowd, but a shift nonetheless. His eyes, usually dancing with mischief, narrowed, a flicker of concern replacing their usual sparkle. The band, oblivious, played on, the horns brassy and bright, the drums a steady heartbeat. Then mid-phrase, as the word sweet hung in the air, Dean stopped. His hand, which had been gesturing with a flourish, dropped to his side. The microphone, usually his closest companion, seemed to hum in the sudden stillness. The piano player hit a final lingering chord before the abrupt silence descended, thick and disorienting. The audience, caught off guard, murmured, their collective breath held. What had happened? A technical hitch? Dean never missed a beat. Dean's voice, now devoid of its usual playful lilt, cut through the quiet, direct and clear. "Folks, if you'll bear with me for just a moment." He stepped to the very edge of the stage, his eyes fixed on Eleanor. "Ma'am," he had said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Are you all right?" Eleanor, startled by the sudden address, looked up, her tear-filled eyes wide with surprise. She shook her head, a small choked sob escaping her lips. "I didn't think so," Dean murmured, his brow furrowed with genuine worry. He turned slightly, raising a hand. "Could we get some assistance down here, please? A glass of water, perhaps? Is there anyone with her?" His gaze swept the area around Eleanor, but she seemed to be alone in her distress. The manager, a portly man named Lenny, scrambled from the wings, looking flustered. Ushers, usually guiding latecomers, now moved with purpose towards the front row. The band members exchanged bewildered glances, their instruments silent, their faces mirroring the audience's stunned disbelief. The show, a magnificent spectacle, had been brought to a complete halt, not for an ovation, but for a single, weeping woman. Dean, the king of cool, had just laid bare a powerful vein of compassion. Eleanor's quiet sorrow. Eleanor felt a gentle arm around her shoulders, guiding her through the hushed murmurs of the crowd. The house lights, once dazzling, now seemed a soft, sympathetic glow as a kind-faced woman from the sand staff led her to a quiet alcove backstage. Another offered a cool glass of water, her eyes full of genuine concern. Eleanor clutched the glass, the chill seeping into her trembling fingers. She took a slow sip, the water tasteless yet incredibly comforting. Dean Martin's voice, the very one that had stopped mid-lyric to insist on her care, echoed in her mind. Not the vibrant entertainer, but the man whose simple, firm words had sliced through her overwhelming despair. She hadn't realized how truly alone she'd felt until that moment. Her husband, Arthur, gone just 3 months prior. A sudden, cruel heart attack that had left her world a silent, empty space. Even the familiar hum of her apartment now felt like a hollow echo chamber. Tonight, she had hoped the glitz and noise of Vegas would offer a brief reprieve, a temporary distraction from the gnawing ache in her chest. Instead, a wave of profound loneliness had washed over her during Dean's ballad, tightening her throat until she could barely breathe. It was a familiar sensation, but tonight it had been too much. She'd tried to be invisible, to fade into the velvet seats, but Dean had seen her. He, a superstar under 100 spotlights, had seen her. "You're all right now, dear," the staff member murmured, patting her hand. "Mr. Martin just wanted to make sure you were taken care of." A small, surprised laugh escaped Eleanor's lips, tinged with a fresh wave of tears. He stopped the show," she whispered, the enormity of it truly sinking in. It wasn't just about her immediate distress. It was about the unexpected warmth, the sudden, undeniable proof that someone, even a stranger, cared. In a world that had felt so cold and indifferent since Arthur left, Dean Martin's act of kindness was a lifeline. It was a quiet sorrow, yes, but now a quiet gratitude bloomed alongside it. Back on stage, Dean received a discreet signal from the wings, a quick nod, a thumbs up. Eleanor was being looked after. A breath he hadn't realized he was holding slowly released. He offered the audience a small apologetic smile. "All right, folks, looks like Our Lady is doing just fine," he announced, the microphone picking up the relief input, his voice. A smattering of applause and appreciative murmurs rippled through the room. The initial tension had evaporated, replaced by a softer, more reflective mood. The show would go on, but something fundamental had shifted in the room, a quiet understanding passing between performer and audience. Dean strummed his guitar, a new gentle melody filling the air. A testament to the unexpected human connection forged in the heart of a performance. The Shadow's invitation. A sharp snap of white paper startled Dean, a pristine envelope thrust under his dressing room door. He'd just concluded a quick rehearsal, the lingering scent of stale cigarettes and cheap cologne still clinging to the velvet. On the plush carpet lay a small unadorned card, its edges stark against the pile. No name, no return address, just a single elegantly scripted line. Mr. Martin, a private matter requires your immediate attention. Midnight, the Crimson Suite. A chill, not from the air conditioning, traced a path down Dean's spine. The Crimson Suite. Everyone in Vegas knew the hushed legend, a nexus of power and illicit dealings. It belonged to Silas Blackwood, a man whispered about more often than spoken. The Shadow. Dean had absorbed the tales, deals brokered, careers shattered, men vanishing into the desert's embrace. Blackwood was a force, cold and calculating, a predator in a tailored suit. Dean's stomach cinched, a familiar knot of unease tightening. He had a show in a few hours, a packed house of eager faces, yet this summons felt more pressing, more perilous than any missed cue or forgotten lyric. He lifted the card, feeling the heft of its unspoken threat. What could Blackwood possibly want with him? As the clock crept towards midnight, Dean found himself navigating the labyrinthine passages of a lesser-known casino, the air growing thick, the silence deepening with each step. The Crimson Suite awaited at the very end, its double doors carved from dark, polished wood, utterly devoid of handle or knocker. As if sensing his presence, they glided open without a sound, revealing a chamber steeped in luxurious, almost oppressive gloom. Heavy velvet drapes swallowed the city lights, and a lone ornate chandelier cast a golden aura over a massive mahogany table. Silas Blackwood sat at its head, a stark silhouette against the subdued light. He was older than Dean had imagined, his silver hair slicked back from a high forehead, his eyes like chips of glacial ice. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit that seemed to drink in what little illumination there was, a faint aroma of expensive tobacco and something metallic, almost like old blood, permeated the air. Mr. Martin, Blackwood's voice was a low rumble, utterly devoid of warmth. Thank you for joining me. He gestured to the empty chair opposite him, a subtle command. Dean settled into it, his gaze unwavering, a careful charm overlaying the steel beneath. He felt the weight of Blackwood's scrutiny, a cold, appraising stare that seemed to strip away the public persona, seeking any fissure of weakness. Dean knew that look. It was the same one he'd observed in the eyes of other mobsters, yet Blackwood's felt sharper, more precise. This wasn't just about money. This was about control. A line in the sand. The heavy, stale scent of cigar smoke, thick as a shroud, still clung to the air of the spacious, dimly lit backroom. Silas Blackwood, a presence as substantial as the velvet drapes muffling the outside world, leaned back in his leather chair. His unblinking dark eyes locked onto Dean, who sat opposite him, an amber liquid in a half-empty glass, untouched on the polished mahogany. "Dean," Silas began, his voice a low rasp that seemed to vibrate with unspoken promises. "You're a man of discerning taste. You appreciate the finer things, the effortless grace of unencumbered living." A thin, almost imperceptible smile played on his lips. "What I'm proposing isn't merely an opportunity, it's an elevation, a chance to transcend the limitations of mere performance, to truly command a piece of this city, to have it serve you." Dean listened, a casual posture belied by the tension coiling in his gut. He watched Silas's ring, a heavy gold band with a single dark stone, gleam under the low light as he gestured. Silas outlined a sprawling network, a labyrinthine enterprise hidden beneath the glittering veneer of Las Vegas. Numbers, staggering in their magnitude, flowed from him with casual confidence, figures that could make any man's head swim. Casinos with fixed games, clandestine bookmaking operations, and silent partnerships in legitimate businesses, all funneled untraceable cash. Silas painted a vision of boundless wealth, of influence reaching into every crevice of the city and beyond. The temptation, Dean admitted to himself, was a phantom whisper at the edge of his awareness. Millions, effortlessly acquired, a life free from financial anxieties, a bulwark that could protect everyone he cared about. It was a potent lure. But as Silas spoke of streamlining operations and eliminating competition, with chilling detachment, a cold knot formed in Dean's stomach. He saw the threads of corruption, the shadows that would inevitably cling to such a fortune. He saw the moral compromise, the quiet surrender of every principle he held dear. When Silas finally finished, the silence in the room stretched, punctuated only by the city's distant hum. Silas's gaze was expectant, a predatory glint in his eyes, anticipating an enthusiastic acceptance, perhaps even a fawning display of gratitude. Dean met his gaze, unflinching. "Silas," he began, his voice calm, steady, "it's a hell of an offer, and I appreciate you thinking of me." He paused, taking a slow breath. "But no, I can't be a part of it." The words hung in the air, audacious and utterly unexpected. Silas's confident smirk vanished, replaced by a mask of disbelief. A flicker of something cold, something dangerous ignited in his dark eyes. The air in the room suddenly felt sharper, colder. Dean had not just refused a business proposition, he had drawn a line in the sand, a stark boundary in the presence of a man who believed no such lines existed for him. Whispers and warnings. The spotlight flickered, not a gentle waver, but a violent spasm that plunged half the stage into darkness during Dean's signature croon. He didn't miss a beat, his voice a smooth stream flowing through the sudden gloom, but a shiver traced down his spine. Backstage, the sound technician, a man usually as unflappable as a stone wall, swore it was a blown fuse, but the way his eyes darted away when Dean met them spoke volumes. Later that week, during his swing routine, a mic stand, seemingly anchored, wobbled precariously, threatening to topple just as he reached for it. He caught it with a practiced ease that looked like part of the act, but the metallic clatter it made sent a sharp jolt through the orchestra. These weren't just glitches, they were whispers, growing louder, more insistent. Then came the notes. Tucked beneath his dressing room door, slipped into his jacket pocket, even left on his car windshield. They were short, printed on cheap paper, and always about the Fixers' Council. The city lights blurred past Dean's Cadillac as he navigated the late-night streets, a knot tightening in his gut. He'd played it cool with Silas, but the man's eyes held a promise of trouble Dean knew he couldn't face alone. Not this kind of trouble. There was only one man in Vegas who understood the intricate dance between power and peril, a man who could untangle a knot before it became a noose. Frank Costello. Dean found Frank in a quiet, dimly lit back room of a modest Italian restaurant, the air thick with garlic and old money. Frank, a compact man with eyes that missed nothing, sat at a small table nursing a glass of dark red wine. He didn't look up immediately, instead making a precise cut into a cigar with a silver clipper. "Thought you might drop by, Dino," Frank said, his voice a low rumble, finally meeting Dean's gaze. There was no surprise, only a knowing acceptance. "Pull up a chair. You look like you've seen a ghost." Dean slid into the opposite seat, the leather creaking softly. "Worse than a ghost, Frank. Silas. He's got his claws in something I won't touch, and he doesn't take kindly to no." Frank took a slow drag from his newly lit cigar, exhaling a plume of fragrant smoke. "Silas is a man who collects yeses like other men collect stamps. He sees a refusal as a personal affront, not a business decision." His gaze sharpened. "What did he offer you?" Dean recounted the proposal, the millions, the illegal venture, and his unequivocal rejection. He watched Frank's face, searching for any flicker of judgment, but found only quiet contemplation. "You have a line, Dean. A good man in a bad business," Frank observed, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "Silas doesn't understand lines. He thinks everyone has a price, and if they don't, they're just holding out for a better one." Frank leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "He won't let this go. He'll try to squeeze you. Your bookings, your reputation, maybe even your family." A cold dread snaked through Dean. "I figured as much. That's why I'm here. What do I do, Frank?" Frank took another thoughtful sip of wine. "You can't fight Silas head-on. Not with brute force. He's got too many hands in too many pockets. You need to make him see that you're more trouble than you're worth, without actually being trouble." He paused, his eyes glinting. "You have friends, Dean. Powerful friends, even if they don't know it yet. People who value a man of principle, especially when they're surrounded by snakes." "Who are you thinking of?" Dean pressed, a glimmer of hope sparking. "The kind of people who hate disruption, Dean. The kind who prefer things orderly, quiet. Silas is a disruptor. He creates waves where there should be calm. Find those who profit from stability and remind them of what Silas threatens." Frank finished his wine, setting the glass down with a soft click. "And in the meantime, keep your head down. Keep singing, and let me make a few calls. Sometimes a quiet word from an unexpected corner can change the whole tune. Outsmarting the shadow. The scent of stale cigar smoke clung to the air in Dean's dressing room, a subtle reminder of the city's unseen strings. He leaned back in his chair, a half smile playing on his lips as he tapped a rhythm against his knee. Frank, perched on the corner of a plush velvet couch, watched him with an unblinking gaze. "Silas has been making calls," Frank murmured, his voice a low rumble. "Whispers about uncooperative talent and misunderstandings at the Copa." Dean chuckled, a light, airy sound that belied the steel beneath. "Uncooperative, huh? I thought I was just discerning." He paused, then added, "Did those calls happen to reach the mayor's office? Or maybe a certain senator who enjoys a quiet game of cards at my regular haunt?" Frank's lips twitched almost imperceptibly. "Coincidentally, yes, and a few key union reps who suddenly found their schedules full." He paused, a glint in his eye. "Funny how that works, isn't it?" Dean's smile widened. He'd made sure to cultivate relationships far beyond the bright lights of the stage. A favour here, a discreet introduction there, small investments in a network that now served as an invisible shield. He knew Silas operated on fear, on the assumption that everyone had a price or a weakness. Dean had neither, not for this. Later that week, Silas made his move. A performance at the Sands was abruptly threatened with a power outage and a technical difficulty that would have cost Dean a fortune in lost revenue and reputation. But as the crew chief began to make the announcement, the stage lights flickered once, then blazed brighter than before. A new, more robust generator, donated by an anonymous benefactor, had arrived mere hours earlier, quietly overseen by Frank's people. The show, Dean's show, went on without a hitch. Silas, watching from a shadowed booth, felt a prickle of irritation he rarely experienced. His usual tactics were encountering an odd, almost ethereal resistance. It wasn't direct confrontation, but a series of precise surgical countermoves that seemed to anticipate his every play. He'd had his enforcers attempt to lean on a few musicians in Dean's band, but they'd reported back with bewildered expressions. Each man had suddenly found himself with an unexpected ironclad contract from a different, larger label, making any form of persuasion financially unfeasible and legally hazardous. Dean, meanwhile, sent his own subtle message. At a private poker game attended by several powerful figures, including an unusually subdued Silas, Dean held a winning hand. Instead of taking the pot, he pushed a stack of chips across the table to a struggling club owner who'd recently faced unexplained permit issues. Dean offered a smooth, disarming smile. "Just a little something to keep the music playing, my friend. We can't have good entertainment disappear, can we?" Silas's jaw tightened. The air around Dean didn't just carry the scent of cologne. It now hummed with an almost palpable authority, an unspoken declaration that he was not only protected but also possessed a different kind of power, the power of loyalty and genuine respect. The shadow for the first time felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Values victorious. The heavy oak door to Silas Blackwood's private study yielded suddenly, revealing a solitary figure silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling window. Silas, a man forged by absolute command, felt an unfamiliar jolt of disquiet. The approaching man wasn't a subordinate or a peer, but a herald, his message a live wire crackling in the air. "The word is final, Silas." The voice, calm and uninflected, sliced through the room's opulent quiet. "Dean Martin is untouchable. Permanently, any further entanglements will provoke a response you cannot afford, from sources you cannot challenge." Silas's jaw tightened. He'd built his shadow empire on a meticulously woven tapestry of fear and obligation. For someone to declare a public figure sacrosanct, enforcing it with such quiet, unyielding authority was unprecedented. He'd initiated the pressure on Dean, subtly at first, then with an escalating squeeze, convinced the crooner would eventually yield. Dean was merely a singer, a performer whose livelihood Silas could unravel with a whisper, yet Dean hadn't fractured it. He'd bent, but only to rebound with surprising tenacity, buoyed by forces Silas hadn't even fully discerned. The messenger paused, allowing the gravity of his pronouncement to sink in. "He possesses allies, Silas, formidable ones, allies who cherish his principles, and they interpret your actions as a direct provocation. Consider this a courtesy. There will not be another." With a final piercing gaze, The man departed, leaving Silas adrift in the deepening twilight. Silas Blackwood, the shadow, felt a cold alien knot constrict in his gut. He was a predator, but even predators recognized when to abandon a chase. Dean Martin wasn't merely a more resilient adversary than anticipated. He was a protected species within a perilous ecosystem, shielded by unseen, impregnable powers. To press on would invite a catastrophe far exceeding the vexation of a thwarted scheme. The arrogance that typically fueled him now tasted like ash. He had misjudged, underestimated the very quality he often exploited in others: genuine, unshakable integrity. Dean's refusal hadn't been an act of defiance, it had been an act of conviction, and that, Silas now understood, was an altogether different breed of power. Miles away, the marquee lights of the sands pulsed against the desert sky. Dean Martin, fresh from a late-night set, settled into his customary booth at the Copa Room, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. Laughter and the clinking of glasses filled the air. A lightness, neatness settled within him. A quiet sense of resolution absent for weeks. The threats had receded. The insidious pressure had evaporated. It was no accident. He had trusted his intuition, relied on the unspoken understandings cultivated over years, the authentic respect he'd earned. He hadn't compromised, hadn't warped his moral compass. And it had worked. The gamble had been immense, the stakes terrifying, but Dean knew, deep down, that some boundaries were not meant to be breached. He took a slow sip, the ice clinking softly. The music swelled from the stage, a smooth, effortless jazz tune. Dean smiled, a genuine, unburdened expression. He was still there, still singing, still Dean. His life, his career, his values, all intact, proving that sometimes the strongest hand in a high-stakes game wasn't the one holding the most cards, but the one refusing to fold.